Today, I'm going to show you how to render an Apple Watch from scratch in Photoshop. Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning Photoshop and photography fun. And I'm so excited about this episode for a couple of different reasons. First, because it's just gonna be an awesome episode. It's gonna be a big, long, beefy episode too, so grab us some popcorn because you're gonna be in it for the long haul with this one. But the real reason I'm super excited for this episode is it's a huge transition for us here at Phlearn. Take a look around you. This is this is the studio that we've grown in over the last 2 years, and you've seen many episodes coming from this space. And we had the chance to upgrade. We had the chance to really enter a great space at Phlearn, and we took the chance. So we are actually leaving this studio. Take a look around you. This is the last time you're gonna see it. This is the last episode ever recorded from this space. Starting next month, we're going to be recording episodes in our new studio, and I can't wait. It's absolutely gorgeous. You're gonna love it. All right, guys, let's get into this episode. It's huge. We got a ton to do. Have you ever had a great idea for a product or an invention, and maybe you sketched that out on a piece of paper, but you wanted to see what it really looked like in person? Well, I'm gonna show you how to create a product from scratch in Photoshop and show you everything that you can do to make things look realistically rendered, including metal, glass, and even a plastic strap. In this episode, we're gonna show you how to make every single part of an Apple Watch, from the strap to the crown, to the face, to the dial on the side, to even the second hands and the moon in the background. We're gonna start off and show you how to use the rounded rectangle tool to create the shape of the watch. And then we're gonna jump in and duplicate that for the crown of the watch, going into our special layer effects to give it that look like it's actually made of metal. Next, we're gonna show you how to make the strap. I'm gonna use the pen tool to create a shape layer, and then we're gonna use that shape to define one side of the strap. We're gonna flip it over, then I'm gonna combine that together with itself, and we're going to put some layer effects on there and make it look like it's actually a piece of rubberized plastic strap. Then we're jumping into the face of the watch. We're making every single detail from scratch, including all the seconds around the dial, the hands, and the 9, including the moon that lights our way home. So keep in mind, guys, this is gonna be a long episode, and it's gonna get complex at parts. So if you're into this and you're like, this is super cool, but it's a bit too advanced for me, I wanna start off with a Photoshop tutorial that's a lot more simple. Check out the episodes on your screen. These are 2 of our most popular episodes, and they're gonna help you get an idea of what you can do in Photoshop, and they move at a much slower, more simple pace. That's gonna help you get a good footing in Photoshop so you can work your way up to episodes just like this one. Welcome to section 1. We're going to be creating the inner surface of the watch in this section. So let's go ahead and get into it. So what I'm gonna do is create a new layer, and I'm gonna group this with itself. We're gonna be using a lot of groups in this tutorial because it's gonna help us stay very organized. All right, we're just gonna call this inner. Okay, now what I wanna do inside of this group is grab my rounded rectangle tool. And this is going to be the tool that we're gonna use to create the face. So rounded rectangle tool, I'm just gonna click here and drag in an area that's going to be about the shape of the Apple Watch. Now, when you're actually doing, if you're trying to, let's say, recreate an Apple Watch or something like that, you're gonna want that image side by side with yours so you can actually get the shape and the size of it and everything like that. Now, I've already written these things down, so I know exactly how large my rectangle is going to be, and you can just copy these dimensions if you want. But if you are doing this from scratch, I would recommend having your reference image right there. For copyright reasons, we're not going to have apple.com's images in our videos, but I did use them when I created this tutorial. So look at that. Okay, so our rounded rectangle tool. Now, my favorite thing about this rounded rectangle tool is after you make it, you can click and drag. You can change all of your little settings here. Like if you want to change your width, you've got this. It's in your properties dialog. Your height, you can change your height as well. So I already know what I want my width to be. In this case, I'm gonna have it be 1830 pixels. So you guys can choose the same one. And my height, I want it to be 2160 pixels. Okay, that looks great. Now let's go ahead and zoom in. This is a rounded rectangle. And you can control each of the corners of your rounded rectangle by clicking and dragging on any of these corners. So you can, take this pretty much to a circle, or at least an oval anyway. So being able to control the rectangle, actually the radius of the edge, that's what makes this tool really special. So we're going to choose a radius of 270 pixels because I measured, and that's about what the face of the Apple Watch looks like. So keep in mind, all these things can totally be changed right here. We're even going to go in and change the fill and the stroke and all the different settings. So here we can decide what we're actually going to fill our shape with. I'm going to click on this dialog right here, and we've got all these different color options. So I'm going to click on black because I actually want to fill this entire watch face with black. But you can fill it with different colors, and you can fill it with gradients, things like that. In this case, black works. Now this guy is our what's called the stroke. It's right around the edge. So I can make this stroke larger or smaller if I'd like. We're going to be using this later on in the tutorial, but for now, I'm going to keep my stroke invisible. We don't need a stroke on there at all. We just want the face, and we want it filled in with black. The next step is to jump into our layer effects and give this an inner glow. So here in our rounded rectangle, I'm just going to double click right here where it's blue. This is going to bring up our layer style. What I want to do is I want to create a look that this is actually the face of a watch, and it's got some glow to the edges. So we're going to click on this inner glow right here. Now by default, I can't really see anything, and that's because it's much too small. So let's go ahead and bring up our size. All right, you can see as I bring this up, let's bring it up to like 215. There we go. That's nice and large. Now the color is set to this yellow, which I don't want. I want this to be white. So we're going to click on our color and drag it up to white. Okay, that looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and lower our opacity just a little bit. Okay, now keep in mind you can change any of these settings at any point in time just by double clicking back into the layer. So if you make something and you don't like it, you can always change these settings. All right, inner shadow looks good. Let's go ahead and click our stroke on as well. So I'm going to click stroke, and now we're going to choose it to be about 5 pixels wide. There we go. We're going to choose it to be on the outside, and we're going to choose black. So let's go ahead and hit OK, and this is what the face of our watch looks like as of now. We got more to go. The next thing I want to do is enhance these gradients a little bit. So we're going to make a new layer on top of my rounded rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and clip that layer by right-clicking and going to create clipping mask. Okay, that's going to make sure this layer only affects my rounded rectangle. Next, we're going to grab our gradient tool, and I'm going to use my linear gradient from our foreground color to transparent, and we're going to choose our foreground color as white. So I'm going to click and drag from the left side to the center. There we go. That's going to create a nice large gradient. It's a bit too large right now, so we'll just go ahead. We're just going to lower the opacity a little bit, and I can always move this to the left or the right if I want to with the move tool. Okay, now let's create another layer on top of that. Let's make sure to clip that as well, and then we're going to add a little bit more of a highlight right around this screen. All right, there we go. Starting to look a lot better. Let's create one more layer. I'm going to clip this as well, and now what we're going to do is we're going to actually create like a little highlight on the top of the screen. So we're going to grab the same tool we had earlier. We're going to use the rounded rectangle tool. Okay, we're going to start here and create a little rounded shape. I want this radius to be even wider than 10 pixels. So let's go ahead and bring up, oh, you know what, that's our stroke. Down here is the radius. There we go. I want our radius to be as large as it can be. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and give this a fill of white, and I don't want a stroke on this at all. So there we go. That's our rounded rectangle. It's going to serve basically as a highlight right up here. So we need to put a layer mask on this layer and then use our gradient tool to go ahead and fade that out. Okay. Nice and easy, and we're going to go ahead and lower the opacity as well. All right, so there we can see that's a lot of stuff we just did, and we've created what looks like the face of the Apple Watch. In order to create the rest of our watch, we need a reference point in the center of our document. That way, as we build the watch out, everything's going to be centered in the exact same place. So what we're going to do here in Photoshop is I need a way, basically, to figure out where is the exact center line of our document vertically and horizontally. And then this layer has to be basically in the exact center of that. That way, when I continue to build out, everything's going to be perfectly aligned. So what we're going to do to get that done is I'm going to make a selection around my entire layer. So Control or Command A is going to make a selection, or actually around my entire document. Now we're going to click on our Move tool, and I'm going to click on my alignment tools up here. And these are going to allow me to actually align my document, whatever's on my layer, to the entire document. So if I click on the right side and the down side, you can see that's exactly where it puts it. I can put it on the left and the top, and we can stick it right there. Or I can click on the horizontal and vertical center, and there we go. Our face is now perfectly centered. So let's deselect, and we're ready to go ahead and start creating the case, or the outer area, for this watch. So the outer area of the watch is going to be really similar to the inner area, except for the inner area we wanted to make look like glass, and the outer area, the case, we want to make it look like metal. So we're going to start off in a very similar manner, but we're going to treat it differently. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. I'm going to group this with itself, and we're just going to call this case. Okay, now zooming in, I'm able to use the same tool that we used before, my rounded rectangle tool. And I'm going to just create a shape that starts right about here on the top left and goes all the way down to the bottom right. Now, a cool little tip, if you hold down the space bar, you can actually move your document, whatever you have, like your rounded rectangle or your selection, you can move it while you're creating. So if you need to help something get a little bit more centered, that's a good way to do it. Okay, now that I've created my rounded rectangle, I need to choose my radius that's going to match the radius of the inner rectangle. So we're going to click here and drag out until we see the proper radius that winds up matching. Okay, now remember earlier when we said we needed everything to be centered around the exact same point, right? Well, let's say I created my rounded rectangle here, like that's not going to serve as the case for the watch. So we're just going to center this as well. I'm going to hit Control or Command A to select everything. Okay, we're going to hit our Move tool, and I'm going to go center and center this again. So now we know that this area is completely centered within the other area of the watch. Okay, perfect. So let's say you've got your rounded rectangle and everything looks good, but you missed the radius, like your radius turned out a little bit too large or too small. How do you go back in and actually change that after you've made your rounded rectangle? Well, what we're going to do is click on our rounded rectangle tool. Okay, then make sure you're selected on your rounded rectangle layer. That's important. So have the tool selected and the layer. Now I'm going to hold the Control or the Command key, and you're going to see my cursor goes from like a crosshair to a black arrow. So with my black arrow, Control or Command selected, I'm going to click there right on my document, on my rounded rectangle. And you can see my properties box changed back to the live shape properties. So here, even after I've created my rounded rectangle, I could go in and change my radius again. So a great tip to keep in mind when you're creating a shape like this, because sometimes you do need to go back and refine these shapes even after you've made them the first time. All right, that's perfect. Now our fill for this layer, we're going to go ahead and fill this with black. Okay, and the stroke, I don't want a stroke on this layer. So we've got a black layer. It's a little bit larger than the interface. I just lowered the opacity so we could see. And now we need to go ahead and subtract out the shape of the inner watch with the area of the outer watch. So to do so, I'm going to go back into my inner group. I'm going to hold Control or Command and click right here on my rounded rectangle that we used to create the inner area of the watch. Okay, and now we're going to click on this rounded rectangle, which is the outer area or the case, and we're going to click on our Layer Mask tool, Layer Mask button. Okay, that looks pretty good, except for it's inverted what we actually want. So I'm just going to hit Control or Command I on that rounded rectangle layer mask. All right, getting pretty complex here, but basically here's the idea. We have this inner watch, which is the glass that's in the center of the image, and that looks great. But I need to create the outer watch, and I don't want this to include the area of the inner watch. It just needs to be on its own as one piece of metal. So that's why we had to select out the size of the inner watch with the size of the outer watch. We did that with the layer mask, and now we've got a perfect rounded rectangle that looks like it actually forms the outer area of our watch. All right, so now we've got our shape defined. Let's go ahead and make this thing look like a piece of metal. What I'm going to do is double click right here on our rounded rectangle layer. So double click there, and we're going to bring up this layer style dialog. Okay, now I'm going to click on an inner glow. So inner glow, we're going to go ahead and click that off. Let's bring our size up a little bit more so we can actually see what we're doing and our opacity. Okay, now by default, this doesn't look great, I know, but we're gonna make it look good. We're gonna change the color of our inner glow. We're gonna click here and we're gonna make that white. So instead of being a yellow inner glow, it's going to be a white inner glow. And now I'm gonna change my contour. This is something really cool that you can do that'll change the basically how the inner glow reacts with your surface. So clicking on different contours allows me to see different opportunities what this glow is actually going to look like. So we're gonna click on this contour because this is the one that's going to actually make it look like a piece of metal. All right, now our size, we can go ahead and change this as well. And as we change our size, let's try something like 68 or whatever. As we change our size, you can see it's changing your effect as well. So when you're trying to create these effects, just make sure you're both working with your size and your contour, and then you want to work with your choke as well. And in this choice, we're going to choose something like that. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Now, keep in mind, if I need to make changes to this at any point in time, it's not a big deal. I can go back in here and change these because we're in a layer style, which can always be accessed by double-clicking right here. Okay, so let's hit OK. Let's click our inner back visible again. All right, and now we should see something that looks a lot like metal. If it needs to be changed a little bit, let's just go ahead and push this layer. There we go. Bring our range up a little bit, helped out a lot. All right, and our size. Cool, and let's play with our choke just a little bit as well. All right, there we go. That looks great. Now, the outer case, we actually want to be below the inner case. So let's go ahead and move this down below our inner case. That's going to allow, there we go, our inner case to look like a piece of glass and our outer to look like a piece of metal. Cool. So by now we've created the outer area of the watch case. Now it's time to take care of the little button and the dial that's on the side. So what we're going to do is duplicate our rounded rectangle here. So we're going to hit Control-Command-J. So we have now just basically another copy of this guy. Now, I just want this to be a button on the right side of my dial. So we're going to move this down. Okay, so it's below our main dial now, or our main round area. There's so many things to keep track of. Okay, and now I'm going to just go ahead and squish this up a little bit smaller. So I'm transforming this to make it look like it's, so you can see right now, this is what it looks like. And it's all funky because I have this layer effects on there with this inner glow. Okay, if you didn't have that, it would look totally normal. All right, and now we're going to place this here onto the bottom right, and this is going to become one of our buttons. All right, that looks pretty good. Now we're going to duplicate this again, and this is going to serve as the dial that's on the side of the watch. So let's just go ahead and hit Control or Command J as well. Bring this up, and I'm going to hit Command T, so we're going to go ahead and tone this down just a little bit. All right, and that's going to serve as the side of our watch, the dial. Let's go ahead and stretch that out just a little bit more. All right, cool. That looks perfect. Now it's time to get little ridges inside of this Apple, the actual little dial on the Apple Watch. So we went ahead and created the dial, but we need to create each of the little marks that's in the dial. And because we need it to be basically spaced the same way, we're going to be using a technique called step and repeat. So to start our step and repeat, we're going to grab our marquee tool, and I'm going to make a selection that's going to be basically one little check mark in the dial. So we'll make it right about that big. Now I'm going to fill this with white. So I'm going to hit Shift-Delete, and we're going to go to Fill with White. Okay, now I can't really see what I'm doing because I'm on white, so let's just bring it over here for now. That looks pretty good. So we're ready to go ahead and duplicate this over and over and over and over again. That's going to make all those little tick marks in the dial. So the first thing I need to do is hold down the Control or the Command key, which is going to turn this layer into a selection. Next, we're going to hit Option-Command-T. That starts the step of the step and repeat. So Option-Command-T starts the step, and we're just going to go ahead and move this down a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's hit Enter, and we're good to go. Now, if we want this to happen over and over and over again, that's called the repeat. So we just did this step, now it's time for the repeat. We're going to hit Shift, Option, and Command T. And each time I hit T, it's going to duplicate my little line over and over and over again. So keep in mind, I'm holding down Shift, Option, and Command and hitting T each of these times. Okay, now that looks pretty good. we've got all these little areas that are ready to become the dial. Let's just go ahead and transform this out because we want it to look a little bit more like it's actually in perspective. So we're going to zoom in. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Go ahead and we don't need all this extra area there. Okay, and now I'm going to hold down the Control key and click right here on this area. Hold down the Shift key and Alt or Option. Okay, and it's going to just allow our little watch areas, all those little ticks or dials that are in there. There we go. It's going to kind of spread them out a little bit more. All right, that looks pretty good to start. Now we need to add some layer effects that are really going to make it look like it's actually made of metal. So jumping into our layer effects, we're going to double click right here on our layer 3. That's all those little areas there. Got a lot to fit on the screen here. The first thing I'm going to click is a gradient overlay. So we're going to check that box right there. And we see we've got a gradient from basically from top to bottom. You can see it's going from light to dark, which looks okay, but I actually want to change this over this way. So we get right about 180. There we go. Now we're going from light to dark that way. Let's see what it looks like over here. All right, that looks pretty good too. Let's see what it looks like at 0 degrees. We'll just try that for now. Okay, so there's our gradient overlay. The next thing we're going to click is our bevel and emboss. Now with the bevel and emboss, you have a lot of different options here. You have an inner bevel, outer bevel. We're going to be using a pillow emboss, which gives it a little bit of an edge, which is going to make it perfect for little areas that we need to look like dials. So now I'm going to adjust my size. So you don't want to get too large because you kind of lose the effect. Too small and it's just not really doing anything either. So let's go ahead and make it a little bit larger. And if you need to zoom out at any point in time, you can do that and it's going to help you choose the best size for your effect. That looks pretty good actually. Okay, now our gradient overlay, let's just make sure that is the area we want. All right, we could see like 180 versus 0, and I think I like 0 a little bit better. All right, so those are all the little adjustment knobs on our Apple Watch. I just need to make sure that this is only visible where this layer, the rounded rectangle, is visible. So I'm going to hold Control or Command on my rounded rectangle, okay? And we're going to load that as a layer mask for this layer 3 that has all these little areas on it, all these little check marks. All right, there we go. So let's go ahead and put that in the same group, and we can turn this on and off to see the little effect we have for the turning knob on the Apple Watch. And that's the end of the section creating the case of the Apple Watch. In our next section, we're going to be creating the strap. I'm going to show you how to use path layers as well as special effects to give it that really cool rubberized effect. So now it's time to create the strap of the Apple Watch. So let's go ahead and create a new layer, and I want to group this with itself. We're going to double click and call this strap. All right, now let's bring this up above everything else so I can do a little sketch just to kind of get an idea of what I want the actual strap to wind up looking like. All right, so in this layer, what we're going to do is we're going to choose, let's grab this green color. There we go. That looks pretty good. That'll wind up being the color of our watch strap. Okay, now basically I want to figure out about what the strap is going to look like. So I'm going to create something basically at this point just a sketch. All right, there we go, something like that, and then the same thing is going to be on this side over here. Now, whenever you're doing something like this, in this case I'm creating basically the strap of the watch, I'm going to create this side of it, but over here and over here on the bottom is basically just going to be the exact same thing, just flipped over. So I'm going to just create only one side, and then we're going to flip it over around again. All right, so that's my sketch. Obviously that's not good enough. I can't actually use that for the strap. So if I want to create a really nice smooth line, something like that, I need to use the pen tool. So I'm going to hit P for the pen tool, zoom in, and we're just going to basically create some curves that are going to wind up looking like this. So we're going to click down here on the bottom, kind of come up in this direction, all right, and then come down in that direction, click and drag out here, okay, and then click here. I'm going to hold the Shift key, and we're going to drag out there as well. Okay, so I've got that shape. Let's go ahead and bring it down here to finish that out. All right, finish our pen path. Now, as a default, this pen path is obviously, there's nothing in the middle, and it's got a stroke of 10 pixels. Here you can see I could change my stroke width if I wanted to, and it would change here. Now, what I actually want is no stroke. So I'm going to click on the stroke and I'm going to cancel the stroke. But the fill, I want to fill with this color. So I'm going to click right here on our green color. And then I can see what my Apple Watch is actually going to look like. Well, one part of it anyway. And I can decide, does this actually look like what I want? And in this case, I think these areas need to be up a little higher. So with my pen tool, I'm going to hold the control or the command key to click on those. And now I can just click on any of these points and I can move them as I want to. And moving these points allows me to do one thing with the pen tool that I can't do with any other tool. And that's adjust completely what we made after we make it. Don't try to do the pen tool and talk at the same time, by the way. It's not a recipe for success. Okay, basically I can adjust any of these points. So if I needed to, let's just say I wanted to bring this point down here, just like that, I can do that very quickly and you can see it changes the shape and it also changes what gets filled in as well. All right, so let's undo that, and that actually looks pretty good. I think we're on track for a good strap here. So I'm going to duplicate what we have on the left side. Controller Command J is going to duplicate that, and now we're going to flip this horizontally. All right, and let's use our move tool to get it about in the right place over here as well. Okay, and you can see they're meeting in the middle, which is perfect. So let's go ahead and merge these together. You can see we created one half, now we put it on the other half. I'm going to shift click the two of those and hit Controller Command E to merge those together. Okay, there's my strap. Let's go ahead and bring that below everything else with our group. That looks great. Now let's go ahead and add a little bit more layer effects to make it actually look realistic. I'm going to go to my shape layer here and we're going to double click on it, bringing up our layer effects. Okay, the first thing I want to do is add a little bit of texture to the strap itself. I want it to make it look like a nice rubberized texture. So under my bevel and emboss layer, we've got a texture box. So let's go ahead and click that on. Now we can choose a lot of different patterns here. I could choose a bubble pattern if I wanted to. And if you want to add more patterns, you can do so just by clicking on this little preferences icon and then going down to any of these textures. So like if I click on nature textures, you can hit append and it's going to add some nature textures. There we go. In this case, I'm just going to use this light and dark texture for our little watch grain. So you can change, let's go ahead and bring our depth up so you can see what this does. If you bring your scale down, it makes these little areas smaller and smaller. Bringing your scale up is going to make them a bit larger. So you want to choose something that's actually going to fit with the size of your watch or whatever you wind up choosing to add texture to. All right, let's go ahead and bring our depth down to give it a little bit more realistic feel. So now you can see it has that texture on it, but it's not so overwhelming. Okay, now the bevel and emboss itself, let's go ahead and bring the actual opacity of our, there we go, bevel and emboss down to 0. Because we don't actually want the bevel and emboss there. We just want, there we go, we just want the edge. All right, that looks perfect. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on an inner shadow. So let's click that on, and our inner shadow, we want to make a little bit bigger. So right now it's pretty small, but if we make it large, let's go ahead, somewhere right about there. If we make it large, it's going to look like it's actually adding some curvature to the watch itself, giving it a little bit more dimension. All right, let's hit OK. Let's turn these effects on and off so we can see. That looks pretty good. All right, now we're going to add a little bit more dimension, and then we're going to duplicate this watch. I want to create a little bit more shadow on the watch. So we're going to create a new layer right above this, and then with my brush tool, I'm just going to paint black right up here at the top with a very nice soft edge brush. Just like that. Okay, now we're going to change our layer blend mode from normal down to soft light. And that's going to make sure that it's just going to add a little bit more of like a wraparound feel to the watch itself. All right, that looks great. And maybe a little bit right down here as well. Okay, let's go ahead and clip that to make sure it only affects the watch strap itself. All right, and that's a pretty good looking strap. If you needed to adjust, let's say your texture was too visible, just go right into where you see like bevel and emboss here, go into your texture group, and then just bring your scale or your depth down just a little bit to make it a little bit less visual. Perfect. Let's go ahead and group those together. That's our upper strap. And now to create our lower strap, it's really easy. Just hit Controller Command J to duplicate it. So it's like, yep, we got another strap now. We're gonna hit Controller Command T to transform, and we're gonna flip this vertically, okay? And now let's just go ahead and place it right down here on our actual Apple Watch, right towards the bottom. All right, and anytime you're doing this, you can use the up, down, left, right keys on your keyboard for some fine-tune adjustments. All right, let's hit enter, and that looks great. We're done with the straps for our Apple Watch. Cool, in our next section, we're gonna be creating the face of the watch. We got some really cool techniques coming up with using step and repeat. All right, and now it's time to have some fun. We're gonna create the face of the watch, which is gonna involve a lot of really cool techniques, including step and repeat. So let's go ahead and get in here. I'm gonna create a new layer. Let's group this with itself, and we're just gonna double click and call this face. All right, now that's gonna be on top of everything else. So the first thing I need to do is create the little like second-hand markers. And basically, a lot of this stuff can be figured out with a sketch. So let's say we had a sketch here. You know, I need to create like little lines like this that, you know, all the way around my watch that need to be perfect. And they all need to be stemming out from the same center direction, and I need them to be equally spaced. So when you're presented with a problem like that, it's time to think like, okay, well, how do I do this? And here's my solution for that problem. If you guys have a different way of doing it, totally cool. But what we're gonna wind up doing is we're gonna create one line here, basically, and then another line here. Then we're going to merge those together, and I'm going to use the step and repeat pattern to rotate that and duplicate it over and over and over again. Then we're going to delete out the center, and we're going to make it into a round center section dial. I don't know what these things are called, but it's going to be cool. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to grab my marquee tool, and we're going to make a selection just like this in the center of our document. Okay, now let's go ahead and fill this with white. I'm going to hit Shift-Delete, fill with white. All right, let's make sure we're on a new layer here. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, keep in mind, this is going to be those little ticks on the watch. So in this case, I think we need to make it a little bit thinner. So hit Controller Command T, all right? And then we're just making it a little bit thinner. All right. There we go, that looks good. Now, what we're going to do is duplicate this and flip this, or rotate it around 90 degrees. So I'm going to hit Control J and then duplicate this. There we go, flip it around 90 degrees. So if I shift click the two of those and merge them together by hitting Controller Command E, this is what we have. We have both of these on the same layer. You can see it's basically like a crosshairs, right? Okay, now this doesn't have to be centered right now. We're going to center it in just a little bit, but basically we have our crosshair. We're good to go. Now it's time to create the step and repeat that's going to duplicate this over and over and over again. So to start the step process, we're going to hold down Controller Command and click right here on our shape, which is just this, it's this plus right now. Okay, now we're going to hold Option Command and hit T. And we're going to rotate this around. You can see as I rotate it around, it's creating a duplicate and it's rotating around the center point of this layer. Now I'm just going to type in 5 because I want this to rotate exactly 5 degrees around to the right. So we're going to hit that checkbox up there, and that duplicated and rotated around exactly 5 degrees, which is perfect. So now if we want that to keep happening, that's the repeat part of the step. Now remember earlier in this tutorial, we did this with the little area on the dial. So step and repeat is a very valuable technique. So we started the step, now it's time for the repeat. We're going to hold Shift, Option, and Command and hit T. And each time I hit T, it's going to give me basically a duplicate of our original shape over and over and over again at 5 degrees every single time. All right, so by the time we're done, we've got this, which is basically a sunburst pattern right in the middle of our watch. Now, it's time to go ahead and center this in the middle of the watch. And again, I don't want to just use my move tool to try to get this centered. What I want to do is use the center or the alignment features in Photoshop. So I'm going to hit Controller Command A to select everything. Then we're going to click on our Move tool, and I'm going to click on my horizontal and my vertical. There we go. And now we have a spiral, or basically spiraling out from the center, all of our lines that are going to make up our second hand counters They're perfectly 5 degrees apart and they're perfectly centered in my watch. All right, so let's go ahead and create a ring to define their visibility. So on a new layer, what we're going to do is create a selection with our elliptical marquee tool. All right, and now I basically want to create the shape that's going to define the outer ring of my second hand. So let's make it pretty wide, something like that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and fill that with our foreground color. In this case, it's purple, doesn't really matter. All right, let's center this in the watch now. So again, we're going to hit Controller Command A to select everything. We're going to use our Move tool, and I'm going to center this horizontally and vertically. Now keep in mind, I have everything selected. So if I were to click on this right-hand side, it would put it over there. I could put this on the bottom right easily. So it's nothing to do with the watch. It's centering it across the entire document. And remember, we did that with the watch earlier, so that's why it makes sense. Okay, now if I turn this into a selection, this little pink area, and then make it invisible, well, here on my hands, I can just click on my layer mask button. And there we go. Now we have just visible in that sphere. And if I want to make this a little bit smaller, just hit Controller Command T. We'll just make this smaller just like that. Now I'm going to hold Controller Command and turn that into a selection again. And here on the layer mask, let's just fill this with black. All right, there we go. So what we've done is we created this shape, okay, by using 2 lines and then step and repeating them over and over and over again. We put it in the center. Then we use 2 different variations of this circle to define the visibility of our second hands for our clock. Really, really cool. So now we're going to add one number to our watch because that's what they had it in the Apple ad. So I'm going to hit T for the type tool, and we're going to click right over here, and I'm going to type in the number 9. Okay, now this is the font I want. Helvetica, new, thin, everything looks pretty good, except for the color isn't exactly right. So let's just click on our color here. Start off with our original green, and we'll go a little bit more towards the yellow side. All right, there we go. That looks really good. We're just going to keep this right here for now, because in our next section, we're going to create the hands that make up the Apple Watch. Now we're getting into creating the hands of the Apple Watch, and we've got 3 different hands to make. The first one we're going to start off with is either the minute hand or the hour hand. They're basically the same thing. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a new rounded rectangle. So we're using a lot of the rounded rectangle tool here. Our rounded rectangle, we're going to start right about there, and it's going to come out, yep, right about there. This is going to make one part of the watch hand. So we're going to fill this with white, okay, and it's not going to get any stroke at all. All right, that looks pretty good. Now keep in mind, again, if you need to adjust any of these at any point in time, it's very easy to do. You can just go back and change your radius, you can change your height, you can change your width, all these things with your properties for your rounded rectangle. Okay, now let's create a new layer, and I'm just going to grab the marquee tool. We're just going to create, yep, something like that. Fill this with white. Okay, that's going to be the bridge between our circle and our watch hand. And now we're going to create with our ellipse tool, all right, an ellipse right here around the center. And I'm going to go ahead and fill this with nothing, but our stroke is going to be white. All right, there we go. And we're going to bring our stroke up in size just a little bit more. All right, and that is one of our watch hands. Now, if we want to just make sure everything is aligned, because this guy just created, you know, it's if it was too far up or too far down, I didn't measure that. So let's just shift click the 3 of those and align them all on a horizontal center. There we go. So that is one of our hands. Let's go ahead and group that together with itself. Now, I need to figure out the center of my document here, right? Because I need this little guy to actually be centered. So I can do this in a lot of different ways. One easy way, I could just hold down Shift and click on that, and I can see where about the center of my document is, but that doesn't really help. So let's just try this. I'm going to create a new small little circle here, okay? And we're going to fill this with red. All right, and now I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to match that vertically and horizontally. So this little red dot that I just made right there, That's the center of my document. So if I use my move tool now, all right, and center this on that document, there we go, then we're good to go. I know that the watch hand is centered around the center of my document, which is perfect. Okay, and that's one watch hand. If I want to make a duplicate watch hand, I just hit Control-Command-J to duplicate it. And now I want to make this hand here, I want to make a little bit shorter. So we're going to go to our rounded rectangle, the original rounded rectangle, okay? We're going to click on our rounded rectangle tool, and I'm going to hold down Command and click on the rectangle itself. All right, and now what we can do is just change our width. So I can drag my width down, and this will become our hand, and everything else stays the exact same. All right, so one of these is our minute hand, and one of these is our hour hand. Cool, let's go ahead and rotate them into place. Notice I created these horizontally. That's because it's very easy to work in Photoshop when you're creating something perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical. So if you have something that needs to be at an angle, just create it horizontally or vertically and then change the angle of it afterwards, what we're about to do right now. So let's start with our hour hand. I'm going to hit Control-Command-T on our hour hand. Okay, now we're going to bring our little rotation point to the center of this red dot. Perfect, right in the center. Okay. Now we're just going to rotate the entire hand, and it's going to rotate around the center of that dot. You can see, really easy to rotate the center hand there, or the hour hand rather. Okay, now this guy, we're going to do the same thing. Control-Command-T, and I'm going to take my center point and I'm going to put it right there in the middle of that red dot. And we're going to rotate that around something right about there. Looks pretty good. All right, perfect. So the last thing we have to do is make our second hand. So our second hand, we're just going to create a new layer, okay? I'm going to grab my marquee tool. We're going to grab a rectangular marquee, all right, and create a second hand that's going to come right down here, all right? And this is going to be filled with the same color as my 9 over here. So selecting that color, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and fill with that color. All right, there's our second hand. It's a little bit too wide, so we're going to hit Control-Command-T and skinny that up just a little bit. All right, and now let's just say I created that over here. The easiest way to center this vertically, again, Control-Command-A, use my alignment tools, and now it's centered perfectly vertically in my image. All right, let's bring that down just a little bit, right until about there. All right. And we're going to go ahead and delete out the middle part. So let's hit M for our marquee tool. Let's just select that out and hit delete. Okay, now we need one more of our layers using the ellipse tool. So we're going to bring the ellipse tool in. We're going to create an ellipse that perfectly covers that hole. All right. And now with our ellipse tool, we're going to go ahead and give it a stroke of this same color. So we're going to use this same color here. Okay, a 10-point stroke looks pretty good. And in the inside, it's going to get nothing. So let's make this a little bit larger. There we go. And that's the second hand. All right, that's the second hand showing right around there. And then that little red dot that we used to align everything, that can completely go away. All right. Now my second hand's a little bit too long here, so we're just going to hit Control-Command-T, and we're going to shrink this up just a little bit. All right, and that looks pretty awesome. The watch hands of our Apple Watch. So we're almost done with our watch. We're going to add a graphic to the middle, which is going to make it even more fancy. So let's go ahead and open that graphic. We're going to hit Control-Command-O, and I'm going to choose this moon because one of the advertisements had a moon in the Apple Watch. All right, now everything looks good except it's just a moon and I don't have the whole thing and it's on a black background. So I'm going to make this work. It's going to look great. Let's go ahead and move this over to our new document. All right, move this on to my current document with the watch. And now, basically, I need to make a selection around this moon. So I'm going to go to my elliptical marquee tool, and start making a selection. Now I want to make sure I'm holding down the Shift key, and that's going to make sure that I have a perfectly round selection. Now if you need to move your selection, just remember you can always hit the space bar while creating your selection. It's going to allow you to move it in real time. Okay, so we've created a selection, and I think it's placed pretty well. It includes most of our moon, and we got the rest of the other side of the moon as well. So now that that's our selection, we just need to inverse this selection. So I'm going to go to Select, down to Inverse, and then I'm going to hit the Delete key, which is going to delete everything else on my image. Okay, so now we have our moon. I want this centered just like I wanted everything else centered. So we're going to hit Control-Command-A to select everything. I'm going to use my Move tool, and we're going to center this vertically and horizontally. All right, that looks great. Now, I'm going to change my blend mode from normal down to screen, which is going to make the blacks completely disappear and just show the lighter areas. All right, now let's go ahead and transform this down in size. And you can see it's fitting perfectly in with the rest of my document. Let's bring the opacity down a little bit, and I'm going to rotate the moon around so it's right about there. All right. That looks pretty awesome. Let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look at all of the details of our Apple Watch. We have a beautiful background. You can see this dial turned out great, the strap of the watch, and in all, we have a perfect rendering of an Apple Watch. All right, so as a quick recap to creating our Apple Watch, we started this document out by creating a rounded rectangle. We showed you how to get in there and change the different properties on how to change the radius of the rectangle so you can get a lot of control. Then we showed you how to center your watch in the document and created a duplicate of that original rounded rectangle to create the case. And we used layer effects to make the first layer look like glass and the second look like metal. Next, we created the little dial on the side of the watch. We did it by duplicating the case and then shrinking it down to the right size. Then we created little lines using the step and repeat technique, put a gradient map over top of those as well as a bevel and emboss, and made it look like they're actually grooves inside a metal. When it came time to create the strap, we created just a quarter of what we needed using the pen tool. Then we duplicated that horizontally and then duplicated it vertically, using layer effects to add a little bit more texture and depth into the strap. And then finally on the face, we showed you how to make each second-hand marker by creating one simple plus sign and using a step and repeat pattern to duplicate it over and over and over again. Then we used layer masks to define just the visibility restricted to a circle around the dial. Next, we created the minute hand and the hour hand, followed by the second hand, and finally, we put a moon into the image to give it a little bit more of that Apple refined look. So by now, you're probably in one of two camps. You're either in camp one, where you feel like you just stuck your brain in a blender and hit puree and you can't think anymore for a month. In that case, check out some of the episodes on our screen right now. They're a little bit more simple than this episode, and they're a great place to start. Now, if you're in camp 2 and this was perfect and you follow along and you want more advanced tutorials, be sure to check out our pro tutorials on phlearn.com. Right now, we're featuring the Beginner's Guide to Levitation, which is the most advanced tutorial we've ever created. It's over 5 hours long and teaches you Photoshop and photography from start to finish on 3 different images. It's a wonderful tutorial and it's a great way to take your Photoshop and your creativity to the next level. Thanks again for watching this tutorial, guys. Super cool you're able to hang out with me and learn Photoshop. I know this was a big one, but if you stuck with it, you are a champ. If you love Photoshop and photography just like I do, you're gonna love phlearn.com, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel easily. Just click on your screen right now and you are subscribed. We send free Photoshop and photography videos every single week. And if you love this episode and you wanna see more of this type of episodes, or if you have a question about this type of episodes, just leave it in a comment right down below. We'd love to hear from you. We're trying to build a beautiful community here at Phlearn that values sharing and caring and everything else that is good in the world with Photoshop and photography. Thanks again, guys. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone. Whew! No bloopers. I just did that entire thing perfectly from scratch. In this episode, this will all be recap, so welcome to recap heaven, Asa. 9, including the moon that lights our way home. That may have been the corniest thing I've ever said. You guys want to see my notes for this episode alone? These are all handwritten, by the way. Why not? Including the moon that lights our way home. Yep. I think their video editing team will put them on this side of the screen anyway. Well, I don't know. Yep. Oh, you know what? There's more. Cool, we're gonna go ahead All right, also, all right, let's go ahead and add, the Apple Watch has a 9, some text in the Apple Watch. All right, so let's go ahead and add all these notes for this episode. Bam! Talk about love from me to you. Poof, that's love. No, that's not love. This is love. This is nothing.